to the cloud. There we go. Just to let you know, you can click when you get that little message about the recording, click got it, and you should be back onto your normal screen. We are going to be recording this session because we've had several people reach out to us saying that they couldn't be here, but they do want the information. So just so you know, if you decide to pick your nose or do anything on camera, it's going to be recorded and sent out so that everybody in the conference will be able to see that. Also, as we gather, I would love for us to start with a word of prayer. And so would you bow your hearts with me as we go before the Lord? Gracious Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for the wonderful opportunities that you present before us. Some that are known, some that are unknown, some that we can anticipate with excitement, some that we can expect will bring some degree of anxiety and fear. Regardless, Lord, we are choosing today to trust you and to trust the plan that you have for your church, for your pastors, for all of us, Lord, on this journey. Lord, thank you that transition is not new to you, and nothing that we are about to face is a surprise to you. And because of that, Lord, we place ourselves into your embrace of grace as we navigate these waters of change. All of this, Lord, we pray in Jesus' name. And all God's people said, Amen. Amen. Well, I'm going to be sharing my screen, and every time, we do this on Zoom, those of you who are familiar with Zoom, I will not be able to see the full span of little faces that block our normal screen. So if you have a question, you're going to need to interrupt me. You can post a question on the chat room. You can also post ask a question simply by unmuting yourself and say, hey, excuse me, David, can I ask a question? Feel free to do that. What I'm going to do, just to let you know in advance, is I'm going to be giving you a bit of information. And then at the end, we're going to have some Q&A and application times. But if you need to get something clarified, or if you have a specific question, don't hesitate to interrupt me. Feel free to do that. And since I'm going to be sharing my screen, I won't necessarily see clearly what's on the chat. And so Jacqueline Hines, Pastor Hines, if I could ask you, could you just kind of gauge the chat room for me? And if there's something that I'm not seeing or paying attention to, can you interrupt me and just say, hey, David, we have a chat question for you?
Sure, I'll do that.
Thank you, Jackie. I appreciate that. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to share our screen now. Hopefully you'll be able to see that. And I'm going to, if it gives me the ability here, I'm going to click play. This is a workshop, obviously, on pastoral transitions in the local church. If you are here and you thought this was going to be a different kind of workshop, or this was ballet for clergy, or how to get your pastor to do liturgical dance or something like that, please, now's the time to click off. But we're going to talk about pastoral transitions in the local church. Transitions are rather unique. Every single person goes through transitions, and ironically, we actually go through transitions on at least a minor scale every single day. So really what we're talking about when we're talking about pastoral transitions in the local church, these are significant shifts in what is normal. And so rather than us seeing these as negatives, I want us to reframe it. And so if we can reframe, then transitions actually become opportunities. And they're specifically opportunities for us to redefine boundaries. This is really important for us. When we redefine boundaries, we're talking about personal boundaries as well as corporate boundaries. And so this transition season for all of us, whether you are a pastor facing a transition, you're representing the PPR or SPRC at your church, or a member of the congregation at large, whatever your role, these transitions are actually positive opportunities for you to redefine boundaries. And the redefining of boundaries is first and foremost for yourself, redefining them for your call, your behavior patterns in your spiritual life. What do I mean by your call? We're going to talk more specifically about that in a second, but it's the reason that you got into ministry, or it's the reason as a layperson that you feel compelled to be in a leadership role within your church. It's also a time for you to redefine your own behavior patterns. It's an interruption. This shift gives you an opportunity to, in computer language, reboot. Reboot what you've always been doing. Reboot the old patterns that maybe didn't get you anywhere, but you needed something to interrupt that flow. And it's also an opportunity for you to redefine the boundaries of your spiritual life. It's going to really be a wonderful chance for you to go deeper with your relationship with God. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. This is also a season where you can redefine the boundaries for your marriage or your significant relationship. Anybody who's ever moved, you know this. It changes everything, not just for you, but for the family. And so those of you who are representing PPRs or SPRCs, your pastor, your new pastor, is going to be moving into a whole new community. Now, even if they moved just 6 miles away from their prior church, it's still a new community. It's a new community of the congregation. It's a new community of what that church's mindset is. It's a whole new thing. And so that newness is going to shift their marriage or significant relationship. It's going to, it has to, because you're changing the environment around which that relationship has been either in survival or in thriving mode. The same is true for those of you who are pastors. You are going into a relationship and environment that has existed prior to your arrival. And so that shift is an opportunity for you to kind of reclaim, reorient yourself to what this means for you and your family. And so also it's an opportunity for us to redefine the boundaries for the new congregation and pastor. And that specifically we are going to be talking about today. And by doing that, I want to share with you what I have kind of named 7 simple rules for pastoral transitions. 7 simple rules for pastoral transitions. And before I do that, I'm going to pause here and I'm going to break us into very random breakout rooms. And as we do that, I'm going to break us into 8 breakout. I'm going to go 10 breakout rooms, go real small here. And as I do that, you have one task. And you only have just a few minutes to do this. So when you get into your breakout rooms, we don't have much time. I want you to answer 2 questions rather quickly. Whether you're a pastor or PPR, doesn't matter. Just what's one thing that you're really excited about related to this new transition, going to your new church or welcoming your new pastor? But what's one thing that really excites you about that? And number 2, what's one thing that maybe you're a little anxious about? And be conscious of the fact that we only have just about 7 minutes to go around this little room and share our thoughts. And so let's be as brief as possible, jump into the deep end of the pool real quick. And I apologize in advance if I'm matching you randomly with somebody that you really just couldn't wait to get away from. So let's break out, and I will give you a warning in just a couple of minutes when we're going to come back from the breakout room. So jump into you'll see a little sign that says join breakout room. And so I'm going to increase that number just a tad. There we go. One more. And so as soon as you see the sign, join the room, click on join the room. And then when I call you back, it's going to automatically shift you back here. See you in just a couple minutes. Hey, John, we're in breakout room sessions. We'll be back as a large group in just a moment. Did you want to join that, or did you want to hang out here for a little bit? Hi, Kathy. We are in breakout sessions right now.
Yes, I went to I went to the breakout session and I couldn't unmute. So it had me go to my settings and now I came back to you.
Do you remember which group
so I'm
you were
having,
in?
I think I was in room 8. I think.
Let me put you back.
I don't know why
if you're okay with that.
I wasn't sure I was going to even get back here.
David, I'm sorry. Right. I was explaining to you, but I was on mute.
Hopefully this works for you. Hopefully that works for you.
Okay. Thank you.
David,
You're welcome.
I was explaining to you, but I didn't realize I was on mute. I was just checking in to make sure everything was okay. I was having a devil of a time trying to get in here because of Outlook.
Oh, thank you, John.
Yeah, but it looks like you're in good shape. So, yeah.
Oh, wow.
I'll
so far.
Yeah.
So far.
You don't need me to hang around. Just keep you in prayer.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah, keep me in prayer, John. Thank you.
All right. Good to see you again, man. Take care.
You too, brother.
Bye-bye.
You too. Everybody's gathering back in. This is good. Seconds and everybody will be back. Beautiful. Everybody should be back now. That's good. Okay, just if for those of you who feel comfortable and adept at doing Zoom chat, what's just a word, just a word or a two-word phrase. If you can put into the chat what you're really excited about or really nervous about, you can just kind of put that in there. What the reason I'm asking you to do that is to show the universal nature of what people are facing when you face transitions. So just kind of do that at your leisure. Excited for change. David, welcome back to the district where I'm a part of, West District. Good to have you. A lot of excitement, expanding the church ministries and mission, fresh start, new communities, fresh perspective. This is good. Looking forward to that. New passions, excited about outreach. A new appointment gives new opportunities to evangelize. Wonderful. New community activities, cultural difference. Good, good, good. How about from a standpoint of what you're anxious about? What about your anxiety? A word or a phrase. Big shoes to fill, yeah. Familiar, but different. Roles of leadership changes. Not knowing. Divide between old timers and new timers. Ooh, really good. Loss of people we love, welcoming new pastor. Yep, good.
Just hoping for acceptance.
Say that again, Ted.
Just hoping for acceptance by longtime members.
Good. Ted, are you a pastor, clergy person?
No, I'm chairman of the SPRC.
Oh, so you're hoping on behalf of your congregation that they will accept the new pastor?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Good. That's what I would call a loaded statement. I would, in other contexts, I would start exploring that a little bit more with you, but thank you for sharing that. There is, in any kind of situation, there is an opportunity for us to be anxious, and anxiety is not a bad thing. But it is an opportunity for us to transition in a healthy way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen again. And as I do that, why did it not allow me to do that? Oh, come on. Let's try this one more time. There we go. And as we share my screen, I'm going to dive back into and give you what I'm calling 7 simple rules for pastoral transitions. 7 simple rules for pastoral transitions. And I'm going to whiz through this as quickly as possible so that we have the best opportunity to interact. But don't hesitate to interrupt and ask a question for clarification or to post it. And Jackie, if there's something that's posted that I should deal with right then and there, interrupt me. Otherwise, we'll wait and try to capture that at the end. So 7 simple rules for pastoral transitions. Here's rule number 1. Rule number 1 is spend time with God. Now, this sounds basic. It really is basic, but it's often one of the most overlooked rules of transitions. So during this time, spending time with God, I'm going to encourage you to pray for the Holy Spirit to reveal God's mission mandate for your life and for the church, and for the courage to live it. And what I mean by mission mandate is what defines you? What defines the priorities of who you are? And in this opportunity of new connections, the new pastor and the new church, especially the new pastor with the new PPR, SPRC, define the priorities of your first 90 days. I'll talk more about that in a few moments, but the mission mandate is first about you as the pastor, kind of defining who you are. What is the uniqueness that makes your call your call? Why did God draw you into ministry? Remembering that, defining it, writing it down, doing whatever it takes to clarify that on the get-go, you have an opportunity to redefine your own personal call boundaries. This is what brings you into that local church. Now, we are all United Methodists. We know that we have pastoral changes based on what the bishop and the cabinet have prayerfully considered the most advantageous for the big picture. So we get that. I would like to add to that framework that God has uniquely called you to ministry, and that goes with you wherever you go. It's important to name it. The first time I led this kind of workshop, I had an individual say to me, well, I'm just going to wait to get to the church and see what they need me to be. That is not what you need to do. Trust me. The local church is not who sent you to that local church. God sent you to that local church. God called you to ministry. God called you and shaped you for such a time as this. You are bringing into that context the uniqueness of your call. You have to name what that call is. And it's really critically important to do that. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few moments, but that mission mandate is really important. Now, for me, it has shaped itself over the course of time. When the very first time I did this, I was making a transition to a new church. The bishop and the cabinet have identified me based on my training as a person who's skilled in conflict, so that I get sent to churches that have been dealing with conflict and doing turnaround. And so when I was sent to a church, I was told very little about it, just that they were dealing with some polarizing issues. And this goes back about 20 years or so ago. And so I took a week and I just prayed. I prayed and I listed out, finally at the end of the week, I had listed out some very key priorities. There were 8 of them, 8 priorities that defined who I am in ministry and in my call. And I led based on that mission mandate. When I was being sent to my next church, I did the exact same thing and narrowed that down to 5. And then when I was going through this process yet again, several years later, I narrowed it down to 1. My mission mandate personally is to mentor and multiply. So that little mantra of mine goes with me wherever I go. So mentor and multiply. When I lead teams, when I preach, when I do visitations, whatever I'm doing, I'm asking, who can I take with me? Who can I take with me? Now, even doing these kind of workshops, and I do lots of workshops for the conference, I'm thinking, how do I multiply the kingdom? How do I take people with me on the journey? So mentor and multiply, that's who I am. It goes with me wherever I go. And it begins to shape the priorities of why the Lord sends me to whatever church I'm going to. I believe that God is doing that through you as well. For those of you who are pastors, that's a really important design. For those of you who are here as representatives of your SPRC or PPR, you need to allow and encourage your new pastor to do this process. It's going to be a win-win. Yes, there are going to be things on the list of to-dos that the pastor needs to do. But you need to allow your pastor to be who God has shaped her or him to be. And you will benefit from that. It doesn't make logical sense, but since when do we think spirituality always is logical? God has something in mind. So discern what that mission mandate is, and then lead from it. Pastors, as you're spending time with God, discern and sketch prepare, my encouragement to you, the first 3 months of your sermons. Resist pulling out old messages. Engage God for God's message for your new church. Your first 3 months of messages will set the stage for the rest of your tenure. You may react and say, "Well, 3 months. I don't know the church." You know two things. Number one, you know yourself. You know your mission mandate. You know what shapes you in ministry. At this point, you can build the first 3 months around what that initial call is. Second, you're already, I would pretty much guarantee, you're already checking out that local church to which you are going to, right? If they have a website, you've already been through that website. You're already formulating perspectives and thoughts. Identify within what you are learning, either from the website, from your initial conversations with PPR members, with the chairperson of the PPR. Identify what are some of the passions that you learn about that new church. What do you identify as some of the frameworks? It could be phrases on their websites that you keep seeing popping up all over the place. Ask yourself as you're diving in, what am I learning about this congregation? What do they value? And begin to prepare a series of messages that help bring out what you're learning in positive frameworks. Identify with them. Begin to, for those of you who are pastors, you may have heard this phrase, begin to exegete your culture. Exegete the church. What are you discerning that they value? What's making them tick? And if you're going into a situation that maybe has been conflicted, how can you reframe that as an opportunity for us to discern the voice of the Lord to move forward? This is really critically important. Old tenured individuals might have, and they spoke this to me a long time ago. They would say, "Hey, just don't take it easy. Don't sweat out trying to change anything. You don't want to change anything in your first year." It's like, hey, the reality of our culture today is people are going to form their opinion of you as the pastor of that local church within the first 90 days, whether you like it or not. So you can begin to cast vision within the first 3 months by using your tool of preaching. Pray about it. Ask the Lord, what is the message that you have for this congregation? What is it that I'm to hear? In fact, as you engage this, maybe consider go sit in the parking lot of that new church and pray. Lord, what is it that you are envisioning for this congregation? Jot notes to yourself. Take a journal. Start worshiping right there on the parking lot and see what the Lord downloads for you. Also, for both pastors and churches, do an honest moral inventory of yourself or yourselves, addressing the emotions of the transition. In negative separation, so, the pastor, you couldn't wait for the pastor to exit. There was major conflict or major issues, or you couldn't wait to get away from that church or because of whatever issue. In negative separations, ask yourself, what did I do to contribute to the problem? What was my role? Because we do not live in a vacuum. In positive separations, ask yourself, what do I need to leave emotionally? What do I need to do to leave emotionally? That's rule number 1. Spend time with God. You may say to yourself, with all the packing I'm doing, with all of the transitioning I'm doing, trying to move my family, trying to do this, I don't have time to spend time with God. Trust me. Take time. Make time. This is the most foundational gift that you can give to yourself, to your family, and to the incoming church. And congregations, as you're welcoming your new pastor, give them the space to do this. It is a win-win. Trust me on this. All right, rule number 2. Establish healthy boundaries early in the new appointment. Establish healthy boundaries early in the new appointment. Mutually covenant around days off, weekly Sabbaths, office hours, and then respect them. Honor one another's boundaries. Pastors cannot give what they do not have. So pastors, negotiate with your new SPRC and congregation what your weekly rhythm will be. You know, certainly you're not going to have that all nailed down in the first week or two, but within the first month or so, establish what that rhythm will be. They can't respect what they do not know. And whatever patterns that you bring will be the patterns that they grow to expect. So if you're a pastor who historically doesn't take your day off, and then suddenly in a given week you're taking a day off and somebody calls you and you get really angry because they're interrupting you on your day off, well, you modeled for them that you don't take your day off, and so it's confusing of roles. So just clarify that and allow yourself the space to self-define, and then the church can honor that. SPRCs model for the church that it's important for the pastor to put her or his family first. Teach and model for the church that the pastor is not a concierge. This is so important. We are shifting to a different culture in the 21st century. Now, I still hear this. There are individuals who say, well, pastor, you're on call 24/7. No, the pastor should not be on call 24/7. No one should be on call 24/7. Certainly there are emergencies, but not everything is an emergency. So what we need to do is we need to establish systems within the church so that we can respond to one another in a healthy, life-giving way. SPRCs and pastors. That means design, equip, commission, and deploy a congregational care team of trusted laypersons to work with the pastor for providing congregational care needs, especially coverage for the pastor's days off. So if a normal wear and tear situation happens and somebody calls and the pastor's on their day off or on vacation, everything doesn't get paralyzed. There's a system in place that can respond. By doing this, we're actually living out the biblical mandates of what it means for us to be the body of Christ. And then pastors, I want to challenge you. I do this for myself. I want to challenge you to determine to spend at least 3 to 5 hours per week out in the new community. Model missional living. The way I have done this for myself, I write sermons, right? You write sermons. Well, why not write a sermon at a local restaurant? Now, what I used to do is I used to go to the Barnes and Noble in Lancaster, where I was serving, and I'd plop myself on Thursday mornings in the cafe, and with coffee in hand, I'm writing my sermons, but I'm also engaging the public. So often I'll look for opportunities. I'll pray, walking in, going, Lord, who do you want me to connect with today? Would you bring them and establish an opportunity for me to share the good news of Jesus? Inevitably, time after time after time, not only did I write a message, but I've prayed with people in the middle of Barnes and Noble Cafe. I'm sharing the gospel with individuals. I've had individuals, accept Christ in the middle of restaurants just because I chose to work within the public domain. Now that's me. That's what I do. I can work within those distractions. Maybe you can't. So choose another way. How can you model missional living? Now you might say, David, well, I'm only part-time. I'm quarter-time in my appointment. Oh, but you're still writing a message, right? What does it look like for you to live out the very thing you're trying to teach? Challenge yourself and engage your SPRC chairperson to help think through what's that place within this community that offers the most advantage for me to engage the community. Maybe it's serving in a missional capacity. Maybe once a week you're serving soup at a soup kitchen, or whatever it looks like for you within that community. Be the face and model of what you are trying to get your congregation to do. Establish healthy boundaries. Rule number 3, don't put your old stuff on your new pastor or your new church. Don't put your old stuff on your new pastor or your new church. It is vital that you work to deal with any unresolved relational conflicts, power groups, hurt feelings, separation issues, etc., prior to the new pastoral connection. Do not speak badly about a former pastor or former church with your new pastor or your new church. That always says more about you than it does about them. It shows about your hurt. Maybe you are still hurting. Maybe you're still grieving. Maybe you're still angry. Whatever it is, deal with it. Do whatever you need to do to deal with it. Go into therapy, go into spiritual direction, talk to another pastor, talk to someone. But do not put your old stuff on your new pastor or your new church. What do you need to do to leave behind what needs to be left behind in order to move forward? Genuinely ask yourself that and do that hard work of letting go. It is normal for a congregation to grieve the separation from a pastor, especially a beloved pastor, and a pastor to grieve the separation from a church. Now, this is really important when you are separating. Separation boundaries are vital and healthy for both the exiting pastor and the incoming pastor, as well as for their respective churches. So exiting pastors, this is for those of us who are exiting churches. A pastor's failure to leave is always reflective of that exiting pastor's separation anxiety. It is your responsibility to exit. If you truly love that exited congregation, you will work your butt off to transition that congregation to their new pastor. No excuses. Too many incoming pastors or churches are sabotaged by poorly exiting pastors or churches. This includes social media boundaries. You need to separate. You need to exit. You can still be friends. I get that question every year. Can we still be friends with people from our former church? Yeah, but what you have to do is you have to set the boundaries. They might, as friends, they might start talking, hey, well, so-and-so is doing this, our new pastor's doing this, and I can't believe that you must be really cringing. You have to be the one to go, time out. If we're going to continue our friendship connections, we can't talk about any of that. Let's discover other things that define our friendship, but we're not going to engage in that. Anytime you engage those kind of conversations about the old pastor, the new pastor, the old church, the new church, you are triangling yourself and you are dismantling everything that you work so hard to do in equipping that congregation in discipleship. So the responsibility to exit is on you. Incoming pastors, show grace to the exiting pastor and their legacy. Your new church's ministry has a history that predates you and will postdate you. Honor the before, and you will be honored after. If the exited pastor fails to exit, contact your district superintendent. I'll talk about that in a second. So incoming pastors, it's really important to create a pathway. So hear me when I say this. The general rule of thumb is that an incoming pastor should not have anything to do with the incoming church until the exiting pastor has exited, right? That's the general rule. It's a rule that's established in order for good exiting and good incoming. However, exiting pastors, feel secure enough in your own sense of call and process to start welcoming the incoming pastor before you exit, whenever possible. If you do that, you're actually going to establish a succession plan. You're going to smooth out that transition. Start introducing that new pastor. And certainly you may be meeting with her or him. That's great, but start introducing them to the leadership. When I exited a prior church, and I knew that I was exiting about 6 months in advance of the transition, I was already scheduled to do a leadership and staff retreat with my congregation. And so I invited the incoming pastor to come and be a part of that retreat. And during the retreat, we did things to help mediate and transition their loyalty to the new pastor. It was really very helpful. Try to think of ways that you can begin to build that kind of interrelationship. It will be a gift that you give to yourself, that new pastor, as well as to the church. So when there is an opportunity where the exiting pastor fails to exit and you contact your district superintendent, if we have any district superintendents on the call right now, it's not the incoming pastor's responsibility to enforce separation boundaries with pastors who fail to exit. That role belongs to you. So be calm, assertive, and firm. 2 pastors and 1 DS's reputations depend on it. And it can be a very positive process. But that's not to be on the incoming pastor. It's going to be on the DS's role. And SPRCs, prior to the new pastor's arrival, communicate to the congregation in a calm but firm manner that the exited pastor is no longer available for weddings, funerals, hospital visitations, and the like. Teach the congregation that it is okay to send supportive cards and notes, but that they are not to contact them for pastoral requests, nor to trash talk their new pastor. The former pastor has now transitioned to another role. Make this a positive experience. Now, a little footnote to this. I get this asked all the time. Well, what about in that transition when somebody dies and the new pastor doesn't know who that person is? Okay, who's initiating the contact to the exited pastor? So if the incoming pastor says, I don't know who this person is, I'm not prepared to do a funeral yet, I want to have somebody speak into that, the incoming pastor could say, hey, exiting pastor, would you stay on just for a little bit? Can you do this with me as we transition? That's totally appropriate, up to you. But there is no expectation. Any invite for that needs to come from the incoming pastor, not from the congregation members and not from the exited pastor. It's boundaries. Okay. Pastors and SPRCs must become skilled at assisting congregations in dealing with loss, grief, and anxiety. The unknowns related to their new pastor. All of that is what you all need to be skilled at. It's our job to help people grieve. Now, you're going to have, SPRCs, you're going to have within the first year at least, maybe even beyond that, you're going to have individuals in your congregations who are going to come to you and start complaining about the new pastor because the new pastor is not doing things the way that you were used to, especially if the prior pastor was loved or long tenured. Anticipate that. And it's your job as the staff parish people to mediate that process. It's for example, Ted, because I see you on my screen here, you already identified as the chair of SPR, and I'm your new pastor coming on board. And so people 6 months in, they're coming to you saying, well, Pastor David's just not preaching the way we're used to it. He's not using the pulpit, and I'm bothered by that. In old days, you as the chair of PPR would go to Pastor David. Pastor David, people are complaining that you're not preaching from the pulpit. You need to go preach from the pulpit. You just got triangled into this. And you got triangled into people's anxiety and grief because they are unable at this point to deal with the grief of transition. So instead, Ted, what you would do is you would go to the person who's sharing this. Wow, I can see that this change of pastors has been really hard for you. Can you say more about why this is important to you? Can you share a little bit more about what's going on and why has it been so important for you that the pastor preach at the pulpit? Now you're getting them to identify what their emotions are and what their reasons are. And then you can say on behalf of the pastor and the SPR, you can say, well, I get it. I understand that change is hard. What I want to do is I want us to give our new pastor at least a year to get to know us and for us to get to know her or him. Can we do that? Can we walk together and just show grace to one another? And if it's a more critical issue, you can, on behalf of the SPR, you can say, well, we don't want our pastor doing that. We want our pastor to be doing X, Y, and Z. That's why mission mandate becomes really important. All right, so transitions, when we talk about transitions, I love William Bridges' book called Managing Transitions, Making the Most of Change. It's a great book. It's a wonderful book for us as clergy to do. It's a wonderful book for SPRCs to work through together. It's not a complicated book. It's not a long book, but it's a great resource. This particular edition that I'm using is 1991. They just redid that not but a few years ago, where William Bridges, who's now long dead, his daughter, Susan Bridges, something, I forgot what her last name is, but she has redone it and recaptured it and made it a really good tool for learning. So she's added some additional small group questions and interactive type stuff. Really challenge you to read that book together as an SPRC. But in this book, Bridges describes transitions as having 3 parts: endings, neutral zones, and new beginnings. Basically, his premise is that we all say people have a difficult time dealing with change. Change is going from point A to point B. His point is, well, people have change every day. It's not change that they have issues with, it's the transitions. And transitions are the emotional processes connected with going from point A to point B. And he says that transitions have endings, neutral zones, and new beginnings. Before you can get to a new beginning, you gotta have an ending. You gotta let go of something in order to birth something. And in between the endings and the new beginnings is what he calls the neutral zone. And the neutral zone is known by being the place of the highest anxiety. So all of that change, all of that emotional processes of going from point A to point B is going to bring about high anxiety. What he also indicates is that the neutral zone, in addition to being a place of high anxiety, it's also the place of highest creativity. And we need to harness that creative energy. All right, so how do I take that and make it applicable for us in this season of pastoral shift? So endings, neutral zones, and new beginnings. The primary emotions of the new beginnings is excitement. When you all wrote your words and phrases in the chat room at the beginning after your breakout rooms, a lot of you were saying there's a lot of excitement. Now, the primary emotion of endings is grief. And so we have to navigate around people's grief. And grief is not just a simple emotion. Sometimes grief shows up in in withdrawal. Sometimes it's in denial. Sometimes it's in anger. Sometimes it's in depression. You will have individuals within your churches go through all of the range of those emotions. More times than not, it's related to the ending phase of our transition process. And in order to get from the endings to the new beginnings, the primary emotion of the neutral zone is, as I've shared, anxiety. And what we have to do is we have to get to the place where we can translate the anxiety of the neutral zone, keep it simmering, because if you get rid of all of the anxiety, people don't have any motivation to move forward. So you want to keep that anxiety simmering so that they are motivated to continue moving toward the new beginning. And what Bridges does is he uses the illustration of the Old Testament story of Moses and the people of Israel going to the promised land. So they left Egypt, so they had an ending. They were going to, to a new beginning, the promised land, and it was the land flowing with milk and honey. They get to that edge of the promised land, and the 12 spies go in. 2 come back, Joshua and Caleb, and they're really excited. We could take it. But 10 of them come back and say, there's giants here. We can't do this. And so the anxiety of the 10 gets filtered into the anxiety of the rest of Israel, and they choose not to go into the new beginning, and they wander in the wilderness for 40 years. Can you see that applying to any particular church? If we allow our anxieties to overwhelm and paralyze us, we will have endings, but we will have no new beginnings. We will roam around within our anxiety within the neutral zone. But God has given us an opportunity to transition in a positive way. So let's take that one step further and go a little bit more practical for pastoral transitions. If the primary tasks of endings is to help people grieve, we can do that in a positive way. So let's bring closure to the unfinished business issues or attitudes from your prior pastoral appointment. Whether that's you as the pastor or you as the SPRC, was there conflict with the prior church or with the prior pastor or with the leadership? Were there controlling people in leadership or in the church? Well, what must be done to detox from that experience? Were you a favorite pastor? Well, how can you move forward? How can the congregation move forward from that exiting process? Those are illustrations and examples. Number 2, you can acknowledge the losses openly. When pastoral changes occur based on conflict, actually spend some time prayerfully taking responsibility or helping the congregation take responsibility for their own issues prior to arriving at the new appointment. If you were a beloved pastor or your predecessor was, give thanks for that ministry and at the same time point forward to what God yet has in store for you and the new church. Name the things that are before you. Name them with openness, not with judgment. Reflect. Make observations of what you see. SPRCs, honor your exiting pastor with a really good farewell. Even if it was a conflicted exit, even if the pastor had issues or you had issues with the pastor, find something that enables you to honor the pastor as they exit. That will say so much about you as a church. Thank them for their ministry, because ultimately God brought them there for a reason. You may think, oh, we didn't get it, we didn't understand. Well, maybe so, maybe not yet. But God is not surprised by what happens. So we shouldn't be either. Give the congregation an opportunity to send the pastor and pastor's family onto their next appointment. In worship, put your hands on that pastor and their family. Send them with commission. Send them with prayer. Do what you can do to honor well as they exit. Okay, so the primary tasks of the neutral zone then, as you're going into and leaning toward the new beginning, facilitate the anxiety so as to foster reasons for change. Do not be overly quick to eliminate all of the anxiety. Be non-anxious amidst others' anxiety. What does that look like? You're gonna hear people in the congregation, those of you who are on SPR, you're gonna hear people in the congregation share with you that they're anxious because the present pastor is leaving and they don't know the new pastor yet. They're going to be excited for sure. Everybody gets excited. Perhaps people will come back or out of the woodwork just to check out who that new pastor is going to be. So all of that anxiety, you want to harness that anxiety. You want to keep reframing it to the positive. If you, as an individual, struggled with your prior pastor, you need to deal with those emotions for yourself. You need to not influence negatively your congregation to sabotage anything related to the incoming pastor, as well as the exiting pastor. There's so much I could say about this, but you get the point. Try creating an environment that innovates positive, we-centered solutions. What can we begin to do to help create a new pathway for our new pastor? Are there things, if there's a parsonage involved, are there things that we can do to really create an upsurge within the conditions of the parsonage? Does it need a new paint job? Does it need some new flowers? What can we do to make this a home? We're going from a pastor who was 65 and retired to a new pastor who has two young toddlers. How can we shape the parsonage to welcome that new family? We haven't had kids in the parsonage for decades. Wouldn't it be wonderful for us to just kind of reshape this? Be excited about what the Lord can do through a church to welcome that new pastoral family. Decide together with your new leadership to create a new urgency for the gospel, a new partnership. Some of you wrote this very specifically in your chat comments earlier. You're excited about the new opportunities to share the good news. Wonderful. Create that new urgency. This is the time. And thank the Lord, we have the good news in the palm of our hands. Well, let's get excited about what that means to be the church in the midst of the 21st century. And share positive biographical information about yourself, pastors, and also the church. Begin to share positive biographical information about your new pastor. Talk excitedly in worship about the future and about the new pastor. And exiting pastors, don't take that personally when your leaders start saying with excitement, hey, we had a conversation with the new pastor and we're excited about allow this, because you're actually fostering a great succession within your congregation that you poured yourself into. Lead the way. Actually, you yourself start talking with excitement about your new pastor. Now, if you meet with the new pastor to begin having conversations to pass the baton, that next Sunday, hey, get up and either part of your message or part of the announcement say, hey, I met your new pastor. You are going to be so blessed. I was blessed from it. These were some of the things that I learned about that new pastor. I am so thrilled that you have the opportunity to have Pastor so-and-so. What you're doing is you are investing yourself in that transition. Also, bolster positive motivation as the congregation now reorients itself toward its new leader. The church will peg the new pastor within the first 3 months of your appointment. That will happen. Now, people will come out of the woodworks and they will show up, and attendance will probably increase that first Sunday. And the next couple of Sundays, they're going to watch you. They're going to sniff you out. It's like taking a new dog into the dog park. for the very first time. A whole bunch of other dogs are coming. They sniff butts all over the place. Sorry for the graphics. I'm a dog lover and a dog owner. Yeah, that's what happens in churches. We sniff each other out, and then we get to an understanding. We're going to peg that new pastor at least within the first 3 months, if not quicker. Also, number 6, define expectations of pastor and church. Ask questions. What are the 1 to 3 things that only I as pastor can do for this church? And then negotiate that with the SPRC. Equip them to fill in the gaps. So this I'm going to give you more details about in just a moment. So you want to focus in. You want to focus during this neutral zone, and you can have those conversations, pastors, with the chair of PPR on behalf of the PPR prior to your actual transition to the role. That's part of the deal. You can do that. But if you don't have the opportunity, at least within the first month, you need to be having a meeting with your PPR to establish this process. What are the 1 to 3 things that only I, as your pastor, can do for this church? And then negotiate that, especially in light of your mission mandate. Number 7, prepare for the new pastor. You know, if you're wired to do so, do a new photo directory. Develop a welcome pack for your new pastor's family. Include local maps, although that's becoming redundant here. I don't mean it in terms of like atlases, because nobody uses that. We just use GPS. I'm talking about the local maps to the things that are special about that community. Like around here in Lancaster County, Roots Market. It's a farmer's market that's larger than anything I've ever experienced. That's open on Tuesdays. If nobody told me about that, I would never have known. This is the best place to get baked goods and Amish stuff and fresh fruits and vegetables. What are those kind of places around the church, around the new community? What can you show or tell the new pastor and pastor's family? Perhaps get some gift cards for dinners of your favorite restaurants to give to the new pastor and their family. Tickets to kid-friendly events when appropriate, because the kids, if the family has young kids, they're going to be transitioning too. How can you care for them? How can you overwhelm them with love on a welcoming level? And then ask how you can make the pastor's family feel welcomed without being overbearing. You don't want to be in your face all the time. You want to create space. You want to create love. And then give that family a chance to settle in. All right, primary tasks of new beginnings. Number 1, group around the task of discerning a new vision, mission, and purpose, or re-own the ones the church has. This obviously is not going to happen in the first 90 days, but what I'm going to tell you next will actually help you do that. As you begin to think as a new pastor, what is the new vision, mission, or purpose of what God is about to do with your arrival at this church? So how to do that? Number 2, work with your SPRC or PPRC on setting up what I've called your evening with the pastors. It's lovingly abbreviated YEP meetings. YEP, your evening with the pastor. Set up YEP sessions with the entire church. There's small groups of church members or attenders that give you a chance to get to know each other, built-in meetings around you listening to their answers to the following questions. They're basic questions, but these are really helpful. Before I give you the questions, this is how I process that. You get your SPRC to set these up for the first 3 months of your tenure there, pastors. So during the first 90 days, if at all possible, you need to be meeting with as many of the people in the church as you can, but in smaller groups. So smaller groups, I wouldn't go above 20, because 20 is probably a bit unmanageable, but small enough that you can engage them and start learning names and faces, and they can start learning stuff about you. And what I do, and what I've done now multiple times over the years, is I'll do these YEP sessions. The sessions, I bring a whiteboard and easel, and I have PPR or SPR members host them in their homes. And so they send out signups, so they invite people, and as many as you can get. Do however, whatever the size of that church is, try to get as many people as possible to engage you on these YEP meetings. And what I do is I ask them a series of questions. And the questions are, number one, what's one thing that you really love about whatever the names of the church is? What's one thing that you really love about this church? And when they answer that, they go around the room. You, as the pastor, write down on the newsprint everything that they are saying. You want to capture this, and they need to see you writing what they're saying. It lets them know that they were heard. It's also going to be a tool that you use later, and I'll explain that. Question number two, ask this question. As you look forward to the next 1 to 3 years, what's one thing that excites you? What's one thing that excites you? Write it down, list it out, bullets, just bullet points. This is what I heard. If you need clarity, hey, you said such and such. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Oh my gosh, that's exciting. What did you mean by that? Can you tell the story? What you're doing is you're hearing what this church values by the stories that they tell. Number three, what's one thing that scares you about that future here? Specifically at the church, but some people will broaden that. What's one thing that scares you? Write it down. And when somebody says something that you have no idea what they mean by it, it seems like they're saying something, but everybody in the room is going, and you have no idea what they're ask them to name it. Hey, when you said that and everybody else kind of went, yeah, I noticed that people were all in agreement. I don't know what you mean by that. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that's all about? What they're going to tell you is it may be stories of hurt that you need to know about. Write that down, name it, let them see that you hear them. And then finally, this is a cliche question, but it's not the questions, it's the answers that are important. If money were no object, what's one thing that you'd like to see our church do for the gospel? What's one thing? If money were no object, what's one thing that you'd like to see the church do? Now, there's going to be, in any group, there's going to be somebody go, oh, money, no object. We're barely making ends meet. I know, and it's really hard. We live in a difficult time. But let's just set that aside and dream with me. If money were no object, if we had a printing press down in the basement, we made all the money we needed, what's one thing that you would want to see our church do for the gospel? This question is all about dreams and visions. And what you're listening for is there a passion that's embedded in this congregation that you need to know about? And so all of those questions are captured in an environment of small group get to know you. To lead off, you can do something a little fun. You can introduce yourself. You can introduce your family if they're present with you. You can say one or two things about what you love, and then the other segue kind of get to know you thing is I go around the room and I ask them to emphasize their first name. Tell me their full name, but emphasize their first name and what their favorite ice cream is. Or the other thing that you can do to break the ice is you can put a list of a bunch of different group icebreaker questions, like what's your favorite ice cream? What's the best place to get hamburgers in this area? What you can just list all of those things generically. tear them off in individual sheets of paper, fold them up, and put them in a bag. And then for setting the stage, you can have one individual within the room pull the question that you're going to ask, just adding a little bit of flair and fun to the evening. And so that question, when they go to introduce themselves, they respond to. You're getting a lot of information about them. They get a chance to hear from each other. And then what you're doing is, after you have answered, they have all answered all of these questions, you want to take all of those newsprints that you have created and you want to hold on to them. And when you're done with doing all of the YEP meetings, you want to spread all of those newsprint out for each of those questions, and you want to look for the most common answers that seem to come up in all of the different groups. And what you're going to do is you're going to identify from within those answers passions, common threads, dreams and visions, and hopefully something that becomes an easy win for you and the leaders to do within the first 90 days of your tenure there. It could be small, it could be big, doesn't matter. You're looking for something that's going to establish that you heard your congregation. And if it's something big, it may take a little bit more than 90 days, but you're going to get stuff moving within that 90 days towards it. That becomes really critical. And these answers, those common answers that you get, you need to tell the congregation what you heard. And so whether in a newsletter, a sermon, a series of sermons, an announcement, what you can do is, after you've met with all of these different YEP groups, you can say, hey, this was such a good time meeting with you all. This is what you told me. This is what you told me. The things that you really love about our church. What you're really looking forward to over the next 1 to 3 years. What scares you. And if money were no object, this is what you said. You don't have to give all of the details, but these are the top answers for what you said. What you're doing is you're communicating with your congregation that you heard them and you value what they value. And pastors and PPR leaders, the answers to these 4 questions are actually going to help you set the priorities for your new pastoral relationship, not just for the next 90 days, but probably for the next year to 2 years, if not more. It works. Trust me. All right. Also, create a transitional, I just told you this, create a transitional strategic plan for the first 1 to 2 years of your appointment based on the answers. Look for an easy win to accomplish during the first 3 to 4 months. Pastors, remember, especially as we come out of this pandemic, that our transition is in person and digital. So PPR and also pastors, we need to create hospitality for both of those venues. So for in-person and virtual, begin to address the following. You can do it through videos, PowerPoint presentations to introduce yourself for those who are digital. Tell people who you are. You give photos of yourself or your family. Do videos, whatever it is that's creatively going to take this into that framework of the digital community as well. Communicate 3 things that you need to know about me as your new pastor or pastoral family. Here's 1 to 2 things that I've learned about such and such church before I got here. This is so really critical. It lets them know that you cared enough to check them out before you got there. And then say things like, I'm so excited to be your pastor and to partner with you, ... What you're doing is you're framing the new relationship. So why is this important? We now have to be the bridge builder. PPRs, please acknowledge this. This is really important. Your new pastor is stepping into a hybrid model of ministry. And so the pastor needs to be a bridge builder that connects the in-person and the digital communities of faith so that we have a sense of community, even when there is a divergence of how we're doing ministry. That is a significant change for how things play out in transitions. We have to think in multiple hybrids. The good thing about doing it now, as opposed to 2 years ago, is that we have pretty much figured out how to do that for worship. And so we're going to need to do this transition using the tools that we've had to learn in doing ministry. It just makes transitions a little bit more complicated. All right, pastors, our leadership needs to be personal as well. In addition to in-person and or Zoom worship and meetings, I would invite you to personally call at least 5 to 7 member families each week. Go through the church directory. Simply say, hi, my name is so-and-so, and I'm the new pastor at such and such church. I wanted to call to introduce myself to you, see how you're doing, and see how I may be praying for you as we get to know one another. The conversation could last 5 minutes, 10 minutes, even quicker if somebody doesn't want, pastors calling them. But that connection will be such a good investment of your time. When you invest in those people on the front end, it will bear huge dividends later. And you might be thinking, I just don't have time to do that. Make time. Really, trust me, that this will be a huge investment for you that will reap incredible dividends. If you have a list of shut-ins, make that a priority to do within the first 3 to 4 months of your time. Go visit them. You don't have to stay long. They don't want you to stay long. But make that connection. I guarantee you, it will make itself known throughout the grapevines of your church. You're building relational connections. Also, pastors, you want to define your priorities. With your PPR or SPR chair, define the top 2 priorities for the next 90 days. Especially as we're coming through this hybrid model, that's what I'm speaking about right now. Where must you spend the majority of your time and energy during this season of post-pandemic and transition? Really bond with your chairperson of PPR, pastors, and PPR chairs, bond with your pastors. Help them succeed. You know your church better than they do. You know your congregation better than they do. You want to see your role as equipping your pastor to succeed in pastoring that congregation. SPRCs realize that your expectations of your pastor will need to change. Your part-time pastor automatically will be putting in at least twice the amount of contractual time orienting to the new church, orienting to the church online experience, redefining his role, and how to do ministry within pandemic and post-pandemic protocols. Guess what? So will your full-time pastor. If your full-time pastor is normally wired for 40 hours a week, in this season of transition, don't be surprised if they're putting in 60 hours a week until things settle in. And you, PPRs, would do wonderful ministry if you acknowledge that and help create a pathway. because your pastor is walking into an amazing amount of stress, not just at the church, but in his or her own family's journey and transition as well. Be intentional in your partnership. Remember, you are not hiring your pastor to do ministry. Your pastor is being appointed to your church to equip you to be a team in ministry. This is really, really important. This has been the way it's always been, but for some reason, for decades, we have forgotten this and we have assumed that our pastors work for us. No, we're in partnership. Our pastors work for the conference, the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference of the United Methodist Church. They are appointed to work in partnership with the leaders of the congregation in order to equip the congregation to do vital ministry. So we have to define that. We have to acknowledge that. And so we have to shift our expectations of our pastor in order for us to move through this season, especially as we come out of the pandemic and post-pandemic protocols. All right. Also, SPRCs, be the first to volunteer. I know I'm a pastor. I'm sharing this from personal experience. Be the first to volunteer, even when it's out of your comfort zone. Realize that your pastor is trying to help transition the congregation in a healthy way, and so are you. So be the first to volunteer. Be creative in offering support to the pastor and pastor family. Do whatever it takes. You won't be sad that you did. It may be challenging for you, but partnering together will help this congregation. Rule number 4, and these will now pick up the pace here. Rule number 4, spend intentional and major amounts of time listening and building trust. So pastors, it's really going to be important, but also PPR members, be present and accessible to get to know the voices of your new church. What are you hearing? What are you observing? You have, pastors, this is so good. This is a gift of transitions. You have an opportunity to walk in to something brand new, and everything, because it's new to you, you get to see as if for the first time. Congregations tend to get nose blind. Remember those commercials about walking in and your home, you live in your home, you don't smell the things that you would, how do I want to put this without getting graphically? You don't smell the things that everybody else who comes to visit your house smells because you got used to it. So a pastor right now, your pastor has the opportunity to come in first time and see what maybe you got used to. Allow that to happen. Allow it to happen. For example, when I came to my current church during my first week, I walked up the main steps of my church and I looked and I noticed that the Welcome Center desk, get this, the Welcome Center desk was hidden off by the side. Nobody saw it. Nobody saw it. So I called the person who was in charge of the Welcome Center and I said, hey, do you mind if we move the Welcome Center to being at the front of the top of the stairs? And she thought I was a gift from God. She's like, I've been trying to get that done for a long time. Do you think we could do that? I was like, oh, no, I think it's great. I think it's easy. So let's just do it. And so we did it. And from that day forward, this is my first week. From that day forward, I became known as the pastor who makes decisions. I made an observation. They got used to it. So trust your observations. Take advantage of this opportunity. Discern who are the leaders by position and or by influence in the congregation. Discern the decision-making culture. So pastor and SPR chair or SPR team, dare to ask those questions. Ask things like, hey, who are the leaders in this church? And of course, your first answer is going to be by position. And then ask, okay, so who are the influencers? Who are the people who are leading, even if they're not in position? Who are the people who, when a decision has to be made, if they're not in charge of a position, everybody in the room goes, oh, well, we're going to have to ask so-and-so. Because if you can get so-and-so on board, everybody's on board. If so-and-so's not on board, give it up. Who are they? 3 words for any church or pastor that wants to do engaging, successful ministry are trust, risk, and growth. If you want your church to grow, you have to take risks. And if you want to take risks, there has to be trust. So if the church is not growing, don't even bother looking at the risks that are not being taken. Go all the way back to, is there trust? Trust in the pastors, trust in the leaders. Is there a mutuality of trust? If not, that's where you need to focus your work on. Do whatever it is to build on that trust. Rule number 5, pastors, determine to lead out of your call. I referenced this earlier. SPRCs determined to allow your pastor to do this. It is ultimately a win-win scenario. It's fundamentally why God sent him or her to your church. So ask yourself, pastors, what are the top 3 things that are part of who I am as a pastor that I absolutely must do? What are those top 3 things that I must do? This goes with me wherever I go. Like for me, that's my mission mandate. It's who I am, to mentor and multiply. What are those top 3 things that you need to do? Ask your SPRC committee, what are the 3 things here at the church that only I as your pastor must do? That's what I referenced earlier. See where there's a lineup, and then negotiate a list from those answers to those 2 questions of the top 3 to 4 things that will focus 80% of your work with your church, at least during the first 2 years. And then fill in the gaps with volunteers or other paid staff when appropriate. So if doing general visitation is not your bailiwick, and the congregation members don't want you visiting them because they think they're going to be dying if the pastor actually shows up, maybe that's not the priority for your church. So don't make that the number 1. So what are those top strategic things that you and your SPR can negotiate that's going to focus the majority of your work? And then SPRCs, it's our job mutually with the pastor to come up with volunteers to help fill in those missing pieces. Rule number 6, listen and look for patterns in the congregation. Research the church's history. What do you learn about that church that is crying out as a defining moment? What are the stories that you're learning from the YEP meetings? What are the pain points that you're discerning? What are the celebrations that you want to harness? I walked into a prior church knowing that I was walking into a conflicted situation. And literally my first week, I walked into the sanctuary and I looked around and I went, if these walls could speak, what would they tell me? Begin to prayerfully listen. Also, I establish, and I encourage you to do the same thing, both as pastors and as SPRC, I established 2 clear rules from the get-go. Rule number 1 is there will be no triangling. And rule number 2 is no anonymous criticism. The triangling, you've probably heard that term before. It's when there's a conflict between person A and person B, and the anxiety of that conflict gets real tight, we bring in person C to take our side, because it's always easier to have two against one. We feel like we're going to be proved right, or somebody's going to join us. It's easier to navigate those emotions. Triangling never works. And it's a foregone conclusion that the third party, that innocent bystander, the third party will end up bearing the emotional stress of the original conflict situation. Now, I can spend tons of time on that, and I can come back to that if you have questions, but you want to resist triangling. So what does that mean? SPRCs. If somebody in the congregation comes to you and says, I have a problem with Pastor David, and they share with you whatever that problem is. In the olden days, you would then take that issue to a PPR meeting, and you would say to the pastor in the meeting, hey, this has come up that people have a problem with you on X. I want you to dismantle that way of doing things. Instead, SPRC member, your first response when an individual says, I have a problem with Pastor so-and-so, your response is, oh my gosh, I can see that this is important to you. Have you talked directly with Pastor so-and-so? If they say, well, no, then you say, well, you need to. If it's important to you, you really need to take that next step. Well, I just don't feel, do you need my help setting up a meeting? I can help be there to set this meeting up so that you can share your heart with the pastor directly, but you need to know I'm not going to take sides. You want to begin to de-triangle the systems within the church. Triangling is one of the reasons why church conflicts become paralyzing and prevent the church from moving forward in mission. The second clear rule is that there would be no anonymous criticisms. So in the olden days, we used to put comment boxes. People could write their comments and put it into a box. And that got shared with leadership. And often what it would be opportunities to badmouth something, or badmouth, the pastor, or say bad things. I gave up doing that. I used to get letters periodically early on in ministry that were not signed, and they would be lengthy pages of criticizing things about, how things were going at the church, and maybe even criticizing me. And I would take them so personally, but I wouldn't know what to do with it because it's not signed. I call them now sniper letters. These are attacks that are not signed, they're not owned, and therefore you can't really do anything with them. So what I have now done is I make a general rule that anybody can say anything they want directly to me. And I will listen to them. I will hear them. But if something is not signed, I throw it out before I read it. And the principle is, if you're not willing to take responsibility for what you're thinking and feeling, I'm not going to take responsibility for it either. I'll let that sit for a second. Old days kept the church from growing. There will always be individuals who don't like what we do in leadership. There will always be, as we move forward in engaging our mission, there will always be people who want to go back to Egypt. There will always be individuals who are grieving whenever change is implemented. What we have to do is we have to bond together and believe in the mission more than making everybody happy. And that sounds harsh. It is actually one of the most loving missional things to do. To help doing that, this is just, we can probably set up a whole nother workshop on this next bullet. But just to whet your appetite, within the first 2 years, engage the leadership, the SPRC and Ad Council in particular, in establishing a membership covenant that lists the expectation of membership, as well as how conflict will be managed in the congregation. Teach it to the congregation, even getting their input, and renew it annually. If you want to know more about that, this sounds like a, a really bold self-plug. Write more about this in my book. The book is called Mission Rift, R-I-F-T, Mission Rift. It's how to lead through conflict in your local church. And really, it's learned over the course of time, but this really frames out the rationale behind doing a membership covenant. Trust me, it's a really good resource to help you and your leaders. In fact, I would encourage pastors and SPRs to read it together, maybe even your ad council to read it together. It's putting the mission first and helping to navigate through conflict situations and people's reactivity. It also talks about what to do with bullies in the church, those who are high controllers, those who are high reactors. It's a helpful resource, but it gives a little bit more of a framework than we have time to do here. And then rule number 7, redefine the role of the staff or pastor parish relations committee. You'll notice that I have been using interchangeably SPRC and PPRC. The old adage was that if you had more than just one pastor or one staff person, you had an SPRC instead of a PPRC. And if you just had a pastor, you had a PPRC. What I have begun to do is I've begun to shift all the way back to a PPRC model. And I have suggested that the pastor is the actual head of staff. And in order to de-triangle in our systems of accountability, the pastor becomes the supervisor for the other staff of the church whenever possible. Now, that's primarily for those who are full-time, but not necessarily exclusively. You can negotiate that. So I have both models here, the SPRC, as well as the PPRC, primarily to accommodate both of those kind of arenas. But as many ways that we can to de-triangle our systems and to equip our leaders and pastors and staff to effectively move the church forward is what it's all about to advance the kingdom of God. Regardless, that role of PPR is not to be the primary role of complete management, but rather one that focuses on removing the obstacles that are preventing the pastor and staff and the church from being all that God calls them to be in advancing God's kingdom. All right. I know that was a lot of information thrown at you. Let me pause here and see what kind of questions we have. Tawanda, I see your question about does the recording need to be restarted? I think it's still recording. And K-Bell, can you address this in terms of quarter-time pastors? What's the this? Address what in particular? and we may not have K-Bell with us.
But
let me open it up. Oh, she's muted. You want to demute yourself?
Yeah, sorry, I was pushing the space bar and I thought that demuted me. I was asking from a position of SPRC or PPR. We're going to get a quarter-time pastor, and that 3 to 5 hours a week spending in the community seemed like a lot to us. So I just wondered if you could, I mean, that's important to us that our pastors spend time in the community, but I mean, you can just do the math and say a quarter of 3 to 5 hours a week. I just didn't know if you could address that.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for the question. Let me ask this broadly. What community are you in?
We're in Southern Lancaster County, Safe Harbor Church. Very, very small church.
And we also...
Yeah, I know Safe Harbor Church quite well, and I know Safe Harbor. I know that community. What I don't know is there your quarter-time appointment, is your pastor working somewhere else full-time?
No, I think she had been, I don't know if she was full-time at her previous charge or not, but she will be, I don't think she will be working elsewhere or I know she will not have another church.
Right. It's also a great question. So here we have a quarter time, and a quarter time for our purposes, we're going to imagine is going to be 10 hours a week, right? Because if 40 is full time, 10 is a quarter time. So the reality is, you and I both know that quarter time is not quarter time for appointed quarter time pastors.
We really want to try to work with her. I mean, I loved everything you had to say about us doing everything that the pastor does not have to do, but we want to do as best we can.
You just made my day.
What? Oh, good.
Yeah, great. So here's the deal. Your pastor has to write a sermon, right?
Right.
So you could encourage her to write her sermon in a local restaurant.
Well, we
just cordon off.
Okay.
Just cordon off a place, a table in the back. What she's doing is she's actively engaging within the community, or maybe it's doing a prayer walk around some of the communities where your people live, or maybe it's looking at on a regular basis. If it can't be weekly, then think in terms of monthly. Can she do 3 to 5 hours in a given month where she's engaging in some other community connections, where she's visible within the community, not just to be an ambassador of the church. Please hear this, because we do this in partnership. It's also for her to get to know the culture, to get to know the environment, to get to know the community, to get to know the heart of the people, what's important, so that her sermons can actually speak within the culture of which she's now a part.
Thank you. Sense? Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Perfect.
Take us up.
I'm being asked a question in the chat. So I'm going to keep this general. What if you find your previous pastor was engaged in unethical behavior, and you do not want to engage in speaking badly of him or her or get bogged down? Okay, so in this kind of a situation, you still need to name what needs to be named, at least with your PPR committee. So if there is a scenario of the exiting pastor that was questionable, you need to engage that from the standpoint of how has that situation, without getting caught into the details, how has the situation impacted the local church? And is there a way for you as the new pastor to work pastorally to help reestablish trust? And trust becomes more important as you move forward. You don't have to deal with all of the issues of the prior pastor in the past. What you have to do is you have to realize that they're going to be grieving, and their grief has different layers. Their grief has layers of betrayal, has layers of discontent, has layers where trust was eroded. And what you have to do is working with your PPR, if the person was a pastor or PPR person, you have to work in tandem, PPR and pastor, to begin to bring healing and restoration of trust. Anytime that there is a trauma or a post-traumatic scenario in the prior tenure of the local pastor, your work extends in the first, instead of just 90 days, you're looking at how do I reestablish trust over the course of the next year to 2 years to 3 years. It's going to take a little bit longer, and you're going to have to be a little bit more patient with the congregation. But your primary job is to help reestablish through your consistent leadership what trust looks like moving forward. Without knowing more details, that's probably the best I can do for right now. Great question. What other questions do you have?
Dave, I have a question.
Sure.
Shall I put it in chat? I can do that.
No, you can say it out loud, Jack.
So I was thinking about the tension between boundaries for a pastor. If you're working 60 hours a week or whatever, does that, you're thinking that's temporary for the transition?
Yes. For the transition, what I want us to do is I want to recognize out loud, both as pastors and as SPR, PPR committees, is that your transitioning pastor is going to be increasing their stress level and increasing their workload just by nature of it being a transition. They're going to have to not only, in many cases, move to a new home, set up that new home, start unpacking, start moving into a new office, start needing to navigate getting people's names and faces and all of that kind of stuff oriented, trying to figure out how to start preaching in a new environment. If you have other staff, meeting new staff people, reorienting to how worship is in that community, getting to know the community. If I have to figure out how to get to new hospitals because there are emergencies, I'm learning all of that stuff new. I don't have any sense of rhythm and purpose yet. And if there are kids involved, I'm having to get my kids involved into a new school system, getting them to orient through all of the loss and change of leaving their friends, orienting them to a new day, a new church. There's so much. So for at least 90 days, probably the better part of that first year, your pastor's schedule is going to be all over the place. And then the best part, what you want to try to do is you want to establish together, pastor and PPR, what is an expected rhythm within which we can honor the larger picture of all of what's going on that I just described. So do you have a specific day off that even if you're working, we're not going to tell people that you're working? We want to honor you, pastor, but we need to know what to honor. And give yourself a little bit of latitude and patience that really the pendulum will swing to the other side before it comes down and lands in the center. And that center will come. It's just going to take some time. Does that help, Jackie?
David, I had a question just in terms of what you went over today. Will you be making the PowerPoint available so we can go back for future reference with some of the good rules? I was trying to listen more so than take notes, but I found everything to be pretty helpful. So is there any way you could share that with us so we could go back and reference what you've talked about?
Yeah, great question, Bridget, and thank you. Thank you that you just told me that it was helpful and that made my day. Yes, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna send all of this stuff to Dawn, and when either she or someone in the conference office will make that available to everybody who needs it. All right, question in the chat. There are a lot of big items in the hearts and minds of our churches and pastors, including but not limited to the role of LGBTQ people in the church. How do you know when you've banked the relational capital to broach such important subjects? Great question, Greg. I'm not surprised that it's a great question from Greg, right? All right, so again, we go back to trust, risk, and growth. Those three words that are essential for us to do vital ministry. So what Greg is really asking is he's saying there's a lot of controversial stuff coming. How do we get enough, to use John Maxwell's metaphor, how do we get enough change in our pockets that we have the leadership credential of trust to be able to have those kind of conversations? So the answer is it depends. It depends on the nature of the church to which you are now going into. If, as we discussed on a previous question, you're walking into a congregation where trust has been eroded and betrayed, I would focus first and foremost on establishing, to the best of your ability, consistent, caring trust to get to that place where they will trust you to lead them as their pastor before you start advocating for one side or another of a main issue. However, if that is a primary voice at the table of that congregation, then you as a leader can engage it to the degree that you are also showing them that you hear them. What you're doing is you're establishing trust, relational capital, by how you listen, how you interpret, and how you build a bridge for their voice to be heard as a body of believers, not just to be a place that hears your voice. So what you need to do is you need to gauge where that congregation is in terms of its trust, of its leadership, and you will begin to feel out what is the voice of that church that is crying out for leadership. If this issue, this primary issue, because it's an issue right now within our denomination, is where the congregation is in their anxiety, then you cannot not deal with it. Do you hear the double negative? It is something that you must face off, because if you don't, they will lose traction with you. But your focus is first to establish trust. And so trust is established when you are listening to the body and they can feel heard by you. So having those kind of conversations to help elicit where the congregation is in these issues, helping them to process before you become an advocate for your own agenda, helping them to process where they are, taking them on the journey of discernment, helping them to engage theological debate, all while at the same time, they are watching you become a consistent leader for them. That becomes really critical. Does that help, Greg?
Thank you so much for all that you shared. A lot of good information. I do have a question. since this is my first assignment, everything's going to be new to me. I am, however, familiar with the congregation. I had filled in there several times when their pastor was away. But out of all the things I need to do, and I'll only be quarter time, what would you say my top priority should be on Sunday 1, July 3rd?
It's a great question. That is actually an appropriate question to ask your PPR chair to negotiate with you. Because what you really want to do is you want to harness the energy of what's already moving in that local church. So, for example, as you're looking at their newsletter, if they have a newsletter, or if you're looking on their website, if they have a website, or if you're looking at do they have things that they're already setting in motion? Do they have a focus for prayer, for example? You know, do you notice that they are constantly doing prayer meetings within the community? If so, then maybe your day one is you're going to stand up there and you're going to say, "Hey, let me tell you about myself, and let me tell you what my absolute favorite passage of scripture is. And I'm going to preach about this so that you get a sense of my personal passion for ministry and for the Word of God. And I want to share with you, and what I would do is I would tie in to whatever you saw, whatever that passion was that you saw from that local church, to your particular message. Try to build a bridge for that congregation. In the day-to-day operations, I would ask that question that you just asked me to your PPR chair.
Okay, thanks.
You betcha. There's a question in the chat: with the advent of email, which can come on any day at any hour, how can we help protect our pastor's time off from the business of the church? Another great question. I love that. So you cannot take responsibility for whether your pastor answers email or not on their day off, but you can coach them to. You can strongly do that. Email can be looked at or not looked at, but that's up to the pastor. I have a smartphone. Many of you do too. One of my downfalls is I'm constantly looking on my email. But what I've learned to do on my day off is that I can quickly scan, and if something is urgent, I will deal with it as an emergency. But by and large, I don't address anything that can wait. I think it becomes important for us as PPR members to encourage our pastors to learn the boundaries of whether or not they respond to what's coming their way. Or as Greg said just now, turn off the phone. Open it up when you're ready to respond. It's a great boundary that you're establishing. You can't take responsibility for the pastor and how they choose to respond to situations, but you can coach your pastor to say, hey, when emails come, we don't expect you to respond if you're off. If it's an emergency, let us know. We can step in. How's that? Other questions? Take one or two more, and then we'll actually break early.
I have another question kind of going off of the whole email thing. And it's not really related to email, but it's more related to like a Sabbath. So I have this complex of, and maybe I'm not the only one, but I struggle with actually taking a day off, not even for vacation, just to take the Sabbath during the week to just spend time with family, whatever, but then not being available for the church. Like that, to me, that's like I'm their pastor, I should be available for them. But I understand you shouldn't be available 24/7. Like that's just because that can become overwhelming, stressful, and taken advantage of. That you're always available. So how do you overcome that dynamic of like knowing that it's important to take that time off, but feeling like you want to be there and available for your congregation if they have a question?
Yeah, it's a great question. And Bridget, what you just told me by the nature of how you asked the question is that you are a person who is gifted with high mercy. You have high mercy and you have high compassion. Those are exceptional gifts. But there is, I'm going to be playful with you if I could. You okay if I play with you a little bit?
Sure.
All right. So we know that there are 10 commandments, and the fourth commandment is to honor the Sabbath. There's a reason for that. And it's to remind us that God is the one who's in control, not us. That God is the one who has established order, and that we can take a day off. And by taking a day off, we're acknowledging that God's got it. God's got this. So I've added an 11th commandment. I hope I don't get struck down, but I've added an 11th commandment. And the 11th commandment goes like this: thou shalt not should on thyself. Thou shalt not should on thyself. So the rationale behind that is, as soon as you begin to think, I should do this, I should be available, I should, if they have questions, I should, then what you're also telling me, and I've been there, this is how I got the 11th commandment, is because I was where you were. It's reminding me that I'm basically saying that I can't take off because the church needs me, and therefore I should be available 24/7, even though intellectually I know I can't be. That's actually a reflection that's very common in me. It's in me, it said that my anxiety was riding too high. And I wanted to make sure that I was available for other people. And what I ended up doing early on in ministry is, even though I said that this particular day, Friday, is my day off, I'm not serious about my day off. So you can call me at any time if you have a question or a need, and I'll respond. And so by responding, I actually reinforced the fact that people will call me on my day off because it fit their schedule. And therefore, I dishonored the fact that God was in control and that I needed a break. So if it helps you, you can say, by taking my day off, I'm honoring God. I'm actually equipping my church to not be codependent on me, and to develop leadership capacities and systems of leadership that actually show I love the congregation more.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Sue. I saw your comment in the chat as well. So thank you for that.
You bet. All right, this question. July contains a youth missions recap Sunday, a VBS Sunday, and a major anniversary in my marriage with a spouse who hadn't. So how soon is too soon to take a Sunday week off? Yeah, also a great question. The reality is you negotiate this with your PPR, your SPR. When I got sent to my current appointment, my wife and I had already planned out our 30th anniversary trip for the first week of July. And, we were supposed to transition. And so I was not going to be available to start my new appointment until July 10th. So I negotiated that with the PPR chair and said, you ain't going to see me until July 10th. We've already made this arrangement. And so they made it work. They made it work. And so we just rebooted everything at a later date. So in this situation, you have significant events. Just simply negotiate that on the front end so that your church knows. How's that? All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to send out these slides or make them available. I don't know how Dawn's going to do that, but we'll make that available. If you would like copies of the slides, just email Dawn Taylor Storm and let her know that you are interested in that, and she'll make those available to you. Thank you all for your time, and let's pray together for good transitions, and watch what God does as he leads us forward. Let me close us in a word of prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for all that you are doing. Thank you for the gift of the life that is yet to come through these new transitions. Birth what you need to birth in us, Lord, as we trust you. All this, Lord, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you. Have a great week, and all the best to you as you move into this season of transition.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.